My name is Olaf Westphalen, and thank you for inviting me here. I've been here now for 3-4 days, meeting the artists in the residency and learning a little bit about Kiev, but I'm probably still quite clueless when it comes to your country or your culture. I've been here before. You'll see I have one piece that actually happened here. So I thought, initially I thought I would do a kind of a talk that's all about what's wrong with art, but then I realized that you don't know me, and I don't want to come across as so negative. So I thought I'd show you what I've been doing, some examples of how I have worked over the years, and if, I don't know, how much time do people want to invest? 20 minutes, 15 minutes, 12 minutes?
An hour.
Okay. Okay. So I may have enough or too much or too little material, but please ask questions if something is not clear or understandable or something like that. Here's a piece that's quite old. I thought I'd start with the oldest and the newest piece in this talk. This was called Walking on the Water, and it was a performance I did in Santa Barbara, California, where I announced in the local papers that this was part of a kind of performance festival. And I announced that at a given time I would try to cross the Pacific with this homemade contraption with styrofoam shoes and helium balloons and so on. And there was a whole group of people gathering, cheering me on and wanting to see it, and it didn't work at all. But so it became first it was this kind of fun and jovial Guinness Book of Records thing, you know, boyish and fun, and then it became slapstick because I kept falling, and then the wind picked up, and I kept drifting along the shore, and in the end, I mean, in the end, people just left and were sort of quite annoyed with me, and the last couple of people then insisted that I come out before I hurt myself. So that was important for me to start with something that's very easy to understand and fun and entertaining, and then do it systematically enough to make it first silly, then sad, and finally annoying. Here's a piece that's quite new. This is just a trailer to a video that was just finishing right now, but it was a performance we did in Nida in Lithuania at the Nida Art Colony. It was called Moawi Emojis, and I'll just show you a very short trailer if it wants to start. Yeah, and sound, I think. Oh, do we not have sound at all? Is that how it is? That is a pity. Okay, so this, it also, you saw it was very jumpy, so I think the file is much too big to be working in PowerPoint. So I apologize for the quality on that. But basically, it was a performance where these three large heads that were based on the emoji that looks like an Easter Island sculpture were meeting in this desert-like landscape and having a conversation about faith and territory and things like that. And in the end, they were reading poems to each other through megaphones that we had inside those costumes. Here's a piece it's also quite old that I did in Kassel in Germany. It was called Treehouse, and it was exactly that. It was a workshop where I recruited a number of people outside the art world largely to build a treehouse in the forest over several weekends. Some people even slept there, and it was this really fun situation, like when you make a treehouse as a child, just enjoying being out in the forest and working together and improvising and deciding whether it needs a roof or not. And then when we were done, we brought the forest workers in and cut down the tree and the treehouse very carefully out of the tree, which was quite difficult because if you just cut the tree, it falls. And so suddenly it became a big technical problem how to get this treehouse intact out of the forest. And then we brought it to the museum in Kassel, the Fridericianum, where we realized it was too big to fit into any of the doors. Of course, when you build a treehouse in the forest, you don't think about museum doors. So it ended up being an outdoors piece with some video on the inside. There's a lot of stories around it. It became sort of a bit of a political problem in Kassel, but I'm not going to talk about that right now. Here's a piece that happened in Kiev, Ukraine. It's called Private Contractors, and this was in 2010, and at the time there had been a fair amount of news about censorship and the government being quite forceful in certain instances. And Per Höttner and I, artist colleague from Sweden, curator, writer, decided, okay, we go there, we're idiots, we're Western European idiots, we have no idea, so let's just offer our services. And so we said we would be private censors. We would offer to censor books privately, because that's that's what we love in the West. We outsource. We take government jobs and give them to private people who do it maybe faster or more efficient. So we offered a service where people could bring whatever printed matter they had, and we would censor it for them. And this was actually at the Les Curvas Theater. This was our work table where we had pens and ink and stamps, and people would bring books or newspapers, and usually things they didn't want anymore, old things. And then we would take things, cut things out, make pages black and so on. But of course we didn't speak or read Ukrainian, so it was based on hunches or aesthetics or what people told us. Sometimes people, they gave us a book and we said, what should we censor? And she said, this page is really annoying, and then we censored. So basically, we made these graphic artworks and gave them back to the people. And it became this almost like at a book fair when you do the book signing, or at a graphics fair when people do something in real life and you get your artwork. And we did it here, we did it at the National Museum, we did it somewhere else. And the last installment was here, at the street near the Bulgakov house, the Artisan Street. And we thought that's a good place because the people were offering, and the audience was of course different based on where we were. At the theater, people were very art savvy and understood that they're getting free graphic materials. At this street, it was a lot of people said, why are you doing this? And why do you waste your time with this? And nobody wants this. And so it was, but we didn't know how to get out of this, because now we had done it for 3 or 4 days in a row. And so we had decided that we would ask some friends who were actors to come and abduct us. So they just came and pulled us into a car and drove off with us. And that was, for us, that was it. Then we went to a restaurant, actually the restaurant we saw yesterday. We went to this restaurant, turned off the phones, and Per and I had a long lunch and thought this was a great way to end something that could have been a little cute. And then when we turned the phones back on, there were about 100 messages, and it turned out that everybody thought that was fun and a nice performance, except for the 2 gentlemen in the uniforms who thought they had to get to the bottom of this. And even though the people from the theater eventually told them, no, it was a performance, they said, no, now it's too late. And then by the time we came back to the to the theater, that we had to go to the police, and we were interrogated for 4 hours, and it was a very, very elaborate ritual, and a much more powerful performance than ours. I mean, it was such an instance where you come as a kind of naive outsider and think, like, oh, I'll do a fun piece about this, and then it was like the local performance artists were much better at these things. What our village needs now is a biennial. One thing I've been always worked as a cartoonist, both in mainstream media and doing comedy for television and so on. And then at some point I decided I could also be the cartoonist for the art world, because the art world does not have its own humor section, especially not about itself. And so I started offering cartoons for art magazines. But the deal was that I would want to be treated like, I don't know, if you look at art magazines, and online publications are different, but not in essence. Every image in an art magazine is ultimately paid content, because eventually, once you've gotten 3 reviews, your gallery, then the editor will call and say, isn't it time to run an ad now? So in the end, every image that shows up in an art magazine is more or less directly paid through ads. And I thought it'd be nice if I had images in there where it goes the other way, where I'm being paid as a content provider. So I basically always would have an agreement where I'm being treated like a cartoonist, which is you get some money, but not very much compared to art sales, but still a decent, respectable fee. So that it reverses the economic logic of an art magazine. And I did that for many years. Here's one that goes, frequently asked questions. Is it okay to show an artist who talks about books I don't understand? Is it okay to show with a gallerist who doesn't understand the books I talk about? If I read a book that I don't understand, but I give my gallerist the impression that I do, knowing he doesn't get it either, is that okay? Or this is, wow, thank you, Dad. Conceptual art by numbers. What? Just numbers? Artists come. It's an edition of 1,000. And then out of this, so I did that for several years, and I was just asked by Belge magazine to do that again. So I actually have my own comics section again in an art magazine. But then at some point, ArtNet and Frieze and these, they all basically started saying, oh, well, we can get this for free. Artists are happy to make cartoons for free. And then I said, yeah, but then they're artists and not cartoonists, and I'm not going to do that. so I stopped doing that for quite a while. But out of doing those cartoons in the art world came a lot of drawings, which I'm showing one as an example that played with the conventions of cartoons without really being cartoons. Here it says allegory and documentary. And some of these things then became large sculptures. This is a piece called Smokestacks here in a gallery in Frankfurt. These very large styrofoam plastic objects with the smoke hanging down from the ceiling. So kind of sculpture. Here, a larger version of that done as a site-specific piece in New York at the Lipstick Building. This is from a series of hand-carved life-size sculptures of businessmen or men in suits in handcuffs, and they would be kind of just, it's very interesting actually, because they were, this was at the time of the Enron scandal in the US, which was, I think, which cost the US economy more than the Afghanistan war. I mean, it really was a massive, massive, white-collar crime, and cost a lot of people their pensions and their homes and so on. And suddenly, for the first time ever, you would see images of white men in suits being pushed into police cars, the head on the, and I realized, usually those, when I see those images in American media, it's brown people or poor people. It's not people in nice suits being shoved into the back of the car. And I thought that was kind of interesting, as just not even commenting so much on what that means politically, but just realizing that okay, I don't know if it's the same here, but in German puppet theater, there's a bad guy, and the bad guy is always has black hair and one eyebrow and swarthy stubble. So he's obviously like a Southern European or a gypsy or, you know, scary-looking dude. And I thought, like, what if that reversed? And if we suddenly all agreed that the really scary people look more like that, you know, that's the people you warn your children of, like, oh, no, don't talk to that guy.
But what happened? What was
Enron? Yeah. It was basically it was a banking scandal where they were playing with people's pension money. It was a risk they were doing. It was before the 2008, the whole bubble in 2008, but it was in the early 2000s, and it was a number of banks that were dealing with pensions and were trying to reinvest it in creative ways to the point where they wiped out basically the savings of.
People didn't get the pensions.
I mean, a lot of people had to declare personal bankruptcy. Yeah, oh, yeah, because they basically the people that were handling these things were starting to play with it and inventing more efficient things. Like, a little bit like any other financial bubble where you realize. But it was massive, and it was also interesting because it went very high up. The Bush family was involved and so on. So it was very interesting, though. Then when I made these in New York, I thought nobody's going to buy them. And they sold like crazy. And I could have, yeah, these sculptures, I think I made 8 or 10. I could have probably made 50. And I said, why are they buying that? It's about them, you know, because they were priced at, I don't know, at that time maybe $20,000 or so. So it wasn't like I would buy them or you or some of you. And then I realized, oh, I know all the people buying them. They were very rich collectors, mostly men, some women, but they were all Jewish. And I realized that in my world, there's the really rich people, and then there's the rest of us. But in their world, there's the gentiles, which are on top, you know, the top of the top. And then there's the Jewish families, which are still the upstarts, and which, in this case, they caught kind of all these Texas billionaires with their hands dirty, and were, of course, more than happy to celebrate that. I had no idea. I thought I would make these and people would chase me out of town. I'm going to hop over some drawings now because I think I don't want to. Oh wow! Why was that so small? Here's a piece I did in New York in actually 2008. I think it was called One Day, and it was a little sort of my. One morning I was reading an issue of the International Herald Tribune, which is sort of the condensed businessman's news of the world. It's like if you ask someone what's the news, back then they would say International Herald Tribune, what you get at the airport, what everybody, and it's condensed and so on. And so I read one issue and decided that morning at breakfast that I would draw every single editorial photograph in that issue, scaled up by 100. And so the first thing was that you leaf through a newspaper in 20 minutes, and then you work 1.5 years to draw it. So that was interesting. And then it was also, what was interesting for me that it really felt like, okay, this is a medium that's on its way out. We're not going to sit at breakfast going through the New York Times that often anymore. And then they were in the gallery. They were just hung in this kind of salon hanging. And what I thought was very interesting is that you didn't know the context, and some things made no sense, but you could tell which part of the paper what belongs to. You know, what was entertainment, what was news, what was politics, what was modern life, and so on. And that all these image conventions were kind of still very, very obvious. And that sometimes you knew exactly what kind of story it was, but you had no idea who the people were. I mean, it was, and that kind of like distorted time, I thought was quite interesting for me. And also that kind of performance of having to, once I decided, actually having to draw them all, which is really tedious. And also having to draw things that are really unattractive to draw, because a lot of them were not great as photos, and even worse as something you have to actually then make in very large. So in that way, I guess, even though it was important that I had to make it and go through it and spend all that time, it was also a classic conceptual artwork where once you've decided what you do, you're stuck with it, for better or worse. This is a piece I did first in New York, and then I showed it in several places in Europe. It's called Avenger of Widows and Orphans, and it's exactly what it looks like. It's a machine that has an archery bow in it that at random intervals the machine slowly pulls one of those what could I have here? One of those arrows out of here and puts it in there and slowly draws back the bowstring, and you know exactly what's going to happen. And that's what happens. At some point it releases, it shoots an arrow into the wall. And everything's charming. Kinetic art is very charming. When things move, we like it. It's a little bit like, you know, at the carnival or something, at the ferry, at the, you know, what do you call it, the fun fair or so. So people were really like empathetic and liked, and it moved very slowly, and it was like, oh, it's going to happen, it's going to happen. The moment it released and hit the wall, it was very, very scary, because you suddenly realized this is a deadly weapon, and it goes, you know, this deep into a brick wall. And that kind of back and forth between a kind of nostalgic idea, like the bow and arrow, where we think of Robin Hood or Native Americans or Zen archery, we have kind of nice connotations. We don't think of Genghis Khan and the Mongol hordes killing off half of Europe. We think we have some kind of pleasant, holistic idea as opposed to a gun. And that at that very moment when that hits, of course, you realize that that's pure nostalgic projection. It's still, and it was also quite accurate. So after a week or so, the wall looked like this. This is, okay, it's hard to read, but this is a piece called FERCO, the Fertility Cooperative. And it started out with ads and posters like this, where in a very kind of utopian and positive language, we talked about the freedom of genetic information, and that DNA is only for you to hold on, but not, to give on, but not to profit from. And so it advertised a anonymous, non-profit, self-service sperm bank that we set up in the gallery. So half of the gallery was rebuilt into a little office suite where you could make appointments. And if you were there, you would meet, for example, me or another gallery employee and go through a huge amount of paperwork, which is modeled on the kind of questionnaires or information you have to give when you go to an actual fertility clinic, only that whenever it says this and this and this and this has to be tested, we would say, we agree to not test this. Or whenever it says, you can't do this and this and this, then we would say, we agree to do this anyway. So it was kind of a contract to, and the punishment for handling genetic material in the EU at that point was 30,000 euros and 3 years in prison. So we were basically knowingly entering into this agreement that we're doing something illegal and we're both okay with this. And then after this whole kind of performance of legality, which was very funny, because when you look at how sperm banks actually try to regulate procreation, it has nothing to do with the real world. For example, in a sperm bank, they will ask you, do you have male pattern baldness? Are you dyslexic? Do you have asthma? Now, in real life, men with asthma are still allowed to have children, or men with thinning hair can still. So there's also this. And then, for example, in Sweden, you have to be married. You have to be married. You can be gay, but you have to be married. So family is enforced as one of the conditions for artificial insemination. Also, you have to. The receiving woman can't be over 40, which is crazy when you think about fertility medicine, and that there's 68-year-old women having 8 children. You know, so the fact to cut it off at 40 is also some strange idea of what a healthy mother would be, and which is most interesting in a country like Sweden, where they're so proud of their multi-ethnic, multicultural, open society, that there's a very strong recommendation that the donor should look like the parents. So basically they're implying that, well, if you're, let's say you're a white couple and you end up with a black child, it's maybe not so good for the child. So there's even a kind of but I mean, there are aspects of eugenics or of breeding in there. I mean, partially, I guess, voluntary, because people want, you know, the 1.90 meter football player rather than the 1.40 meter bookworm or so, but also from the institution. And so all these things kind of came out in this part, in this performative part, and then people were allowed into this room, which was a private room with some hygiene aspects and some pornography and privacy, and they could then leave. This was a medical fridge, minus 40 degrees, this here on this side, and then they could either take or leave a sperm sample. And nobody checked on it, nobody had any control. That was up to, and a lot of people, I think, were in there and didn't do anything, just wanted to say, is this for real? But I, of course, liked the idea, because we've been talking so much about art and life. I really liked the idea that maybe some child came from that exhibition.
What did you do with the sperm you got?
When the show was over?
Yes.
Toss it away.
But during the show, someone could take it.
Oh.
So one could give, another person could
Yeah. People could go in there and do, I mean, they knew, here's your private space, here's the fridge. You can either add to it or take away from it. And, you know, and I think for me, it was very important that it was conceivably possible, but it wasn't necessary that somebody actually did. I mean, who knows, for all I know, they could have all been empty jars. You know, people just playing with me, or, I don't know.
So you didn't check?
No! I don't have. No. Here's part of, around that show. I mean, it was a larger show that dealt sort of, I called it, the show dealt in a way with this moment in which I thought, this was around 2000, or maybe 5 years ago or 6 years ago, but this was this moment before we were all fully going into climate paranoia. It was still that moment where you felt like, wow, we can do anything, you know, I mean, digital technologies was there, travel was there, everything felt incredibly doable, like 3D printing was suddenly, you know, whatever. And at the same time, there were all these news items about sperm quality going down dramatically in the Western countries. And I was at that age, so I knew a lot of people who were like, yeah, it's not really working out. And so I thought, this is this amazing justice of nature, that the moment you're completely at the top of the world, you just stop having babies. And so I thought that would have been good for a sci-fi fantasy or so. Now it's climate change instead of no babies. But long story short, around this sperm bank, there were some more conventional sculptures like this one that spoke about that kind of moment of power and prowess and potency and affluence and so on. So there was, for example, this sculpture of this endless fountain of oil, and you see in the corner, I don't have more images of that here, I think, a series of drawings based on diamond ads. I'm going to jump over this just for focus and time. You can ask me about it later. Okay, this is a piece I did. Okay, in 2000, when the Deutsche Mark was phased out, I lived in New York, and at one point, my mom called me and said, "Oh, have you gotten rid of all your Deutsche Mark?" You know, being a mother, she thought she had to take care of my well-being. In fact, of course, you didn't have to get rid of them. You could exchange them much later. But I started looking and found one coin, this coin. So I had exactly one Deutsche Mark left in my possession in cash, and then decided, okay, I'll make a drawing of it. And so I made a very large portrait of that. It's a little bigger, or maybe 1.5 times the size that it is now in the projection. So a very large drawing of a coin with every little mark it had from, you know, having been used for 20 years and so on. And that was in a show, and it was sold to a German collector, actually, which is interesting. Zwirner has it. So that was that. And then 11 years later, I was invited to the Athens Biennial for a performance, and this was at the height of the Euro crisis, or the crisis in Athens, when they were really having very, very, a lot of political conflict and demonstrations and occupied squares, maybe not so entirely different from what happened here a couple of years later, but it was really this, and it was all, of course, around this idea that they had been forced into the euro and realized they lost control of the economy and things were really falling apart, because if you have a shared currency and its financial policy, or what do you call it, currency policy is dictated by the bigger players, it's of course not in your favor. You can't, you can't play with. You can inflate or deflate your currency as you need it for a small country if the big countries all say, no, we're happy, we're doing good. And I thought it was very interesting how in 2000 the euro was welcomed as this bringer of, both international openness and European values and democracy and money, most of all. A lot of investments went into Greece. And then 10 years later, it was exactly the opposite. And so I thought it might be time, and they were talking a lot about bringing the drachma back. There were all these kind of alternative economic experiments. And so again, a little bit like showing up in Kiev, I didn't know so much, so I decided I'll make a piece about this drawing. And at the biennial, I did a talk where I spoke about my last coin, which I had there, and about, for example, the difference between the German word for currency, which is Währung, which means something that lasts, something that is solid and static, and currency, which is something that flows and is not static. I mean, the Anglo-American concept versus the German, and that might already be part of the problem, that the Greeks trusted Währung and they got currency, So suddenly, and so there was more of a conversation about that and about a gold coin my dad gave me at some point, and I was sort of playing, but it was a conversation about value. And at the end of it, I asked them if they would help me place this drawing somewhere. Of course, the original drawing I didn't have anymore, but I had a full-size printout of it made on a banner, on one of those vinyl banners. And so we talked, and then everybody there decided this would be a good place. And this is the entrance to the Polytechnic University, where in '72, when the military took over or ended the Greek Republic, this was where the students were holding out the longest. And when this very gate was kind of flattened by the tanks and they took the university, the resistance was over and they went into dictatorship for I don't know how many, 10, 15 years, I don't know, longer. Until the late 80s, yeah. So this place is a political holy territory in Athens, and the police is not allowed to go to touch this because it's used as a place where there's junkies there, but there's also a lot of political agitation and propaganda, and people put posters up, and so it's sort of this, because of its history and because it's this sacred space, everybody leaves it alone. So we also figured it can hang there for a long time. So we hung it there and left it there. And the interesting thing is that it stayed for a very, very long time. There were some newspaper articles saying, what is this? What does this mean? Because on the one hand, you could say at that moment in Greece, with Germany being this kind of hated colonial overlord, to put something in German in there with this kind of very kind of classical or fascist iconography, the oak leaves and the symmetry and the typeface. I mean, all that would be really, really unpleasant at that moment. At the same time, that coin stood for stability and money from tourism and the good old days, So it was this inserting into a discourse that was completely polarized and where everybody had a very, very fixed position, pro-Euro, anti-Euro, pro-German, pro-Greek, pro-capitalism, pro-socialism. This thing came in that just where everybody was like, okay. and to me, that's one thing art can do. I mean, if everybody knows exactly where they stand, which is increasingly so on almost every issue. If you go to social media, you rarely find people who say, like, I don't really know. What do I make of this? What do you guys think? Usually you feel like, this is horrible, or this is fantastic. And so this, to me, this was a way of not taking position. That's not my place, and also not telling them something, and especially not as a German. And of course, the German involvement with Greece goes back much, much further. I mean, the city planning was done by the then Bavarian king, and the art academy in Athens was founded by the art academy in Munich. So, I mean, there's a whole, I mean, this history is long and intertwined, and there's a lot of reasons for the Greeks to be suspicious. So I was in no way coming in as like somebody who knew something, but more as somebody who's like, this is weird, you know, how coins change, how the value on something, how the connotations are kind of malleable, and so on. Okay, here's the, this is a good, I'm bringing you my most socialist piece ever. It was a collaboration with Peter Rostovsky, a Russian-American artist in New York. It happened in 2 places at the same time, but I'm just showing you one installation at Art in General. It was a show about the idea of collectivity. So the walls were completely wallpapered with manifestos. Everything from the important ones, the communist or the futurist or Dada or whatever, to the more obscure ones like Weight Watchers manifesto or Gay Men on Crystal Meth manifesto or things like that. So we found, together with a couple of very industrious helpers, assistants that we hired, we found about 5,000 different manifestos and just printed them out and wallpapered the walls completely. And in the center you have this structure that was just a bunch of aluminum ladders from Home Depot that we dunked in bright red paint to sort of have this feeling of him, you know, not really a Tutlin or something, but a feeling of some kind of heroic thing that wants to. And then on the wall there was a series of drawings of exquisite corpses, and that was an intentional pun. Exquisite Corpse is this game when you draw something and the other person draws the rest and so on. And so what we did is we found these images of famous corpses, and Peter would draw one half in his studio in New York, and I would draw the other half in my studio in Stockholm, and then they came together in New York at the Framer. So there you have Mao, and this is the Jonestown Massacre. Over here, cut off was Kurt Cobain, and this, of course, you know, he's hanging in my kitchen now, actually. And so this idea of collaboration or cooperation or doing something in shared authorship was being, this is the Kurt Cobain drawing, was being kind of played out through the drawing that happened in 2 parts and then fit more or less well together. How's your patience level? Honest, okay. We can always end, yeah. Yes.
About you and 3 questions, and I would really appreciate if you would answer in 3 sentences. So, what is the biggest driving forces that makes you create?
Yeah.
The next one, what is wrong with art?
In 3 sentences. Yeah.
Yeah, 1 sentence. And the last one is how would you like the art to be changed?
Okay.
Or
Oh,
what would
yeah.
you like to change? Yeah.
You know that we could speak about this for 3 nights and not get. Okay, my biggest driving force, my biggest motivation, I think, is that. Can I do 2 sentences? One really short, one very short sentence. I haven't come up with anything better yet. I mean, I've tried a lot of other things, like teaching, writing, cartooning, working for television, and it's not. It doesn't work better for me. So one thing is just. I don't know. I don't really have an alternative. That's a bad. But the other answer is that I think art offers something that is very rare in society or in culture. It offers a space where we can negotiate things very fundamentally, where we can practice something maybe like philosophy, but with very different means. through drawing, through making, through communicating with an audience that was more than one sentence. But I think it fulfills a function that is really lacking. And then how should art be better? It should damn well fulfill that function instead of making shiny things to invest money in. And they can be shiny. I like shiny, and I like money. But I think the main thing is art should have that purpose. Art should actually help us understand the world better. And if it's then beautiful on top, even better. I mean, that's the kind of art we love. The kind of art we still admire after 500 years or so is not necessarily what they liked at the moment the best, but they're the things that are beautiful and amazing and maybe well crafted, but also still have meaning, you know? I mean, there's art we see and go like, yeah, this is pretty impressive, but it doesn't do anything. But then if you, for example, see a Giotto, you know, the late Baroque, pre-Renaissance Italian painter, you realize you're looking at something and they were just about to figure out perspective. They didn't know it yet. They hadn't figured it out geometrically. But you see this, you can see, you look at a painting and see like, here's a human being who is at a threshold to a completely different view of the world and is working that out with paint on a canvas while supposedly talking about holy people and angels. But really you see the drama of human mind, you know, somebody actually making that jump, getting a grip on a new and different grip on reality. And that's fascinating. And that happens in science, in art, and philosophy. Doesn't happen so much in entertainment. Doesn't happen so much in, well, I mean, engineering applies these things then, of course. I mean, there are a lot of places where we're inventive, but these fundamental shifts where we suddenly, or literature, you know, where suddenly, you know, Flaubert, a man, writes Madame Bovary, and suddenly we realize, yeah, women can be heroes of novels. It's like, you know, the world. Strangely, the novel had been around since Cervantes. It hadn't really occurred to people, you know. So that's, I think, what art ideally, and that's putting the bar very high. But I think at least that should be what you're aiming for. That was more than 3 sentences. What is wrong with art? Wrong with art is that people don't work and speak in good faith. I think people aren't actually honest about what they're doing, and because it's not rewarded. It's not rewarded to say, for example, you know, Sweden has 30% fascists. There should be some good fascist art. It just doesn't make sense that 30% of the population produces no contemporary art. And it's, of course, because there is a sense like, no, an artist today has to have these and these and these political values. I agree with those values, but I would want to know what kind of imagery comes out of the other side, and I think that's part of the picture. So, and that kind of openness that in other fields, I think, or in philosophy, it used to be like that, you know. You can admire Heidegger and still think that he's dubitable politically and has the wrong bedfellows or so, but that kind of willingness to deal with difficulty and to be honest about it, and also to say, like, you know, I have no idea where I fall on that issue. I'm just an artist, you know, but I'm going to make a drawing about it, maybe. That's not very accepted right now. It's become very academic, very politicized, very, on the one end, and on the other end, it's purely about investments and objects. So there are these two ends. And what's interesting would be somewhere in the middle, I think. I'm sorry, that was more than 3 sentences. But, I mean, please maybe a little later, feel free to also tell me if you agree or not, or what you think.
Well, I have been thinking a lot about the modern art, and what I see, it usually serves two reasons. And these are, the first one is that almost every artist has an urge for self-expression. And this is the driving force, and another end is the art is being produced to make money, and visitors, they are just utility, because almost no one generate art thinking of how it will be perceived by the visitor and how it can be understood. So there is a big whole distance between the art piece and the visitor, between the artist and the visitor, and no one cares about the visitor. And personally, I like the modern art to be more balanced, to be more oriented towards a visitor.
But I think the problem there is that there are so many different kinds of visitors, and it's a little bit like if you think that I've been doing this for almost 30 years now. So think of someone. Let's say you're a nuclear physicist, and you're doing this for 30 years, and then you put out your latest piece of research, and somebody walks in and says, "It doesn't speak to me," and you go like, "Come on, you know." Do your homework, you know. I mean, because I think people do. I think artists do care about the audience, but they also, I think, maybe expect of the audience to do the work, you know, to actually have the interest and the desire to want to understand, and the idea that, okay, we can always say like, yeah, but if I walk into a church and there's a beautiful painting of the Pietà, I get it, I know. And now I walk into a modern gallery and there's something with letters and lines and I don't get it. But that's not quite true, because the people who know a little bit about modern art do get it. And the people who knew nothing about, for example, Christian iconography and the church wouldn't get the Pietà either. So art was always really, really relying on a context. I mean, any classical painting has there's a whole huge cultural apparatus that we had to know before we got it. And the same with, if you look at art from other cultures, you know, for us it's just, I don't know, looks like a figure, looks like a mask, but to them, of course, it's a whole world of meaning that's implied in, you know, a line and a dot. And so I think part of the problem is that the cultural knowledge isn't as homogeneous anymore, because it used to be really, really regulated through the Bible and a certain kind of state apparatus, and that's really much more open now. And that's I think both the difficulty with what you call modern art, but anything after Romanticism. I think the difficulty is suddenly people's concept of art started being very, very individuated, and also the promise, because it also means it does imply that freedom. It doesn't have to be illustration of biblical stories. It could be, you know, I could be, for example, totally into random generated jokes. And it makes my audience smaller, I totally agree. But the people who get it, they get it. And I care deeply about them. But it's a smaller audience, you know, because when I understand your frustration, and I understand your argument, but it assumes that the audience is one body, one homogeneous mass, and it's not, you know. There are, within that audience that comes into the gallery, there are the art students, and they probably think I'm much too conventional. And then there's the Marxists, and they think I'm much too corrupt and sloppy. And then there's the really good painters, and they think I just can't paint. But all these are part of audiences that I can speak to. But the general audience, I would say it almost doesn't exist, but it used to. It used to. I mean, or used to be much more of a, culture used to be much more normative. We knew how to act and what's good and how to look. And now we're all, I can wear this, and you know, other people can wear other things.
Yeah, you know, I partly agree with you, but it's my personal view.
No, yeah.
And well, as I see, as everyone sees, the art is very subjective because the artists, they are known for their subjectivity. They are more subjective than normal people. Normal people, I mean people who are not considered to be creative, for example. Okay, but that's not the deal.
No.
So, I just imagine that an artist, like a teacher, would take care about as much pupils in the class get involved and get interested in the matter, in the subject. Because if, let me finish, please.
Yeah.
Because the artist is like God, yes, like a creator, and God created many things that we use, and He created atmosphere in which we develop ourselves, in which we grow, and artists should be like God, taking a little bit care about visitors, about other people.
The one thing I would agree with you is that there are artists who are interested in their work being exclusive, because I mean, there is a cult of being inaccessible because it allows for exclusivity, which then allows for to also control access and raise prices and so on. You know, if something is very hard to, so I think there are cases where you feel like you're making it more complicated than it is. You know, you look at the work and you go like, this is pretty easy to decode, and you're making it harder on purpose. But I would say that's a minority. But they're the really annoying ones. And I'm not going to name any names. But other than that, no, I don't think people are doing this out of carelessness. I think people are trying to understand what it means to make art today. I mean, I think what you're describing, the kind of cultural product that embraces everybody, that exists. It's called Netflix. You know, I mean, there is a world where that's exactly the concern. Like, how do we get everybody on board and make sure that everybody understands the story? So again, I would say it's quite important that there's a place where you're not too concerned about that. It's open, people can find out, people can ask. I mean, it's not, nobody is forcibly rejected, but it may be a little specialized. I would say, you know, and that, but like talking about the nuclear physicist, you wouldn't say, please go back to the things I know from high school. You know, I know nothing about physics, so they would have to go back to, I don't know, where water boils or something like that. And you wouldn't want, you know, you would want the nuclear physicist to do her job on the level that is possible.
I just wanted to reply to your comparison with the God. So I just thought that God created a lot of things which we still don't understand, and some things which took thousands and thousands of years to decode. For example, like gene.
Yes.
You know, a lot of
the
things are not.
The God created balanced things, balanced atmosphere. Because there is a lot we understand, and this is our fundament based on which we can grow ourselves, we can gain new knowledge, and we can develop. But contemporary art is like an alien.
There are some things, little things that you understand, and a lot of things that you don't understand.
I think.
And in art form is the same. You can understand some things, but you can use it as a ground and try to dig deeper and understand.
Okay, you know, one thing maybe will help you understand my point of view. Let's take Marina Abramović. Her performances, they are partly oriented towards visitor, and visitor gain some insights from taking part. And this is what I like most about modern art. So that's the point.
I want to say one thing. Creation is so completely baffling and incomprehensible that we had to invent religion to make sense of it. I would say. Creation, you know, the world is so incomprehensible to us. I mean that we had to invent religion to make sense of it.
Yeah.
And yeah, but I appreciate the conversation very much, but I think I have to hop over some things in order to keep us from falling asleep here. These are, oh, by the way, very accessible works. They're cartoons and they're funny, and oh, I don't know why this one's upside down, and they're based on a randomized system. There's this object that they built in the 1930s in the US for newspaper cartoonists that allows you to dial 30,000 different joke premises. So it's creativity as a mechanical project. And then out of that, I would create these cartoon drawings. Here's a series of drawings that then led to more involved works called The Tunnels. And it started with a number of drawings. And I started thinking of different permutations of these very, very simple elements, like underground spaces and wooden beams. And then started thinking of what could inhabit these kinds of spaces. You know, this is very accessible. You know, you have Jesus, you have a dog, you have a cop and a gangster, you don't need an artist, you have a plane breaking apart, exercising. So there's a lot of narrative that people get into. And there are a number of larger drawings. You know, there's a very fragile temple. This is based on a Sol-LeWitt sculpture, a minimalist public sculpture. Here you have your party. And there is a video. I don't want to show it on PowerPoint, so maybe I'll show it later. Out of that came a video installation that happens in that world. Okay. Yeah, we're running out of time, huh? out of energy. It's not going to be that much more. This is a project called MOMCO. It's short for the Museum of Modern Comedy in Art. And when you came in, it was realized in Dublin at the Projects Art Center. So when you came in, it looked like this. It had its own logo, even a little plant up there. And then in the back, you saw this large wall, and this was basically what it was. Unfortunately, it's not very focused on the thing, but what it is it's a map, both a historical and logical kind of arrangement of avant-garde artworks. Basically, it's an attempt of, this was based on the idea, like, what if Western avant-garde was actually a comedy routine? Which is maybe you would like that idea. What if these were jokes? What if these great moments of avant-garde art history when everything was turned upside down were actually people cracking jokes on all the art that came before them? And then I tried to construct a fairly credible art history based on that idea. And there's a lot of actual interesting research in there. For example, just before I did this, I was very lucky that Malevich's Black Square was X-rayed. And I don't know if you knew that underneath it had first a suprematist composition, and in the corner it had a little handwritten inscription, and it said, Negroes fighting in a cage. It's true, yeah. There's an X-ray, you can find it. They did it at this institute in Moscow. And this is based on a cartoon by Alphonse Allais, a French humorist and comedian who did a whole series of graphics of monochrome pictures, where it was a red square, and underneath it said apoplectic cardinal in a field of poppies. It said a white square, and it said what do we say, like anemic orphans in the snow, having a snowball fight in the snow. And then there was a black square, and it was called Negroes fighting in a cave at night. And so this icon of modernist reduction and spiritual condensation was based on a really cheesy racist joke. And that's fantastic, because I think it doesn't diminish the value of the black square the least bit. To me, it makes it more interesting that this is possible at the same time. And there's many, I mean, there's one story that's in there is, the fountain that was really not Bischoff's, but Elsa von Freitag-Loringhofen, and for example, Sol-LeWitt's, this is also an actual story, Sol-LeWitt's primary structures, we want to know what's going on here. Okay, I'll talk. The early solid sculptures, the grid ones that everybody knows that are in public plazas everywhere, they were actually, he admitted in a conversation, they were made as jungle gyms for his cats. So he's building them as toys for his cats, and then he started making public sculptures. So these things were kind of combined in this map, and then around it there were models of kind of key moments of, I think, art, kind of moments when art kind of crossed certain thresholds that could have also been narrated as jokes. And there were these little clay figurines. This is Mele Lademan Eukelis, who during the garbage worker strike in New York discovers maintenance art. The idea that behind every work of art or every cultural achievement, somebody is cleaning up and somebody is fixing and so on. This was Roy Lichtenstein, who brought a painting to Career Day as at his son's school, which he was an abstract expressionist at the time, and made this cartoon drawing with Mickey Mouse just for Career Day as his son's school, and then later that became his signature style. This is what's his name? What's his name? The Irish artist. No, I'm blanking. Doesn't matter. Famous Irish conceptual artist taking Marcel Duchamp's EKG as a portrait, which is the last portrait of Marcel Duchamp, who then died of heart failure. Here's Lee Lozano in New York, and so on. Paul McCarthy, very nice story. Paul McCarthy, who was a student in Utah when he saw Yves Klein's jump into the void, and assumed that Yves Klein really jumped. Oh no, he didn't see it. He heard about Yves Klein's jump into the void, where he jumps out of a window, and then he did it himself, so he kept jumping out of windows and broke his legs. And then later he saw the photo and was really disappointed because he jumped feet first, whereas Yves Klein did like a swan dive. And then even later he realized that the photo was a collage, that Yves Klein didn't really jump, but that it was a net. And then he was double. But the point is, this is the beginning of Paul McCarthy as a student moving from conventional sculpture to doing these very physical and painful performative actions, which is based on a misunderstanding or a comical misreading, you could say. And here's Malevich putting the inscription on the black square. And then around and then there was a second screen in this little museum exhibit, so to speak, the Momko Museum, where there was a temporary show of video work that I think also belongs into a history of art as comedic maneuvers or comedic philosophical maneuvers. And there was a video by Gernot Wieland, German artist, a portrait of Marx as a young god. It's a very nice short video. Agnieszka Polska had My Favorite Things was in it. This Rory Rosane had a kind of a very short video in there, and I had one of my videos and something else. So basically, we used it also as a museum that had a temporary show. This is a piece that I did quite recently and that we also played with here with the resident artists, where you use touch as your input for drawing rather than looking. But I'm showing it because it's something that maybe will develop further in conversation with the artists here. And these are some examples of quite recent drawings where I'm trying to use certain, like this is a Klein group that comes out of first math and then structural linguistics. Gréma used it, and then Rosalind Krauss used it when she talked about or developed the idea of sculpture in the expanded field. And I was sort of using these types of graphs to organize certain terms that I found interesting at the moment. In the first one, it was doll versus statue, and what kind of shapes and forms and cultural artifacts would that generate. And this one was fortification as opposed to care, not care as opposed to not fortification. And then there's a whole series of drawings like that. And this is a drawing, actually, this is how I'm thinking a little bit about drawing. But I mean, this question, what should art do? I think part of it is it should allow me to understand the world a little better. I guess that might be subjective, according to our friend. So this was me trying to understand certain types of relationships, sort of dependent relationships where, and I kept thinking of this pumping action where somebody pumps something out and something comes back. And that's a fair exchange. And then suddenly somebody, like here is a junkie and pusher where somebody pumps something out continuously, but it doesn't come back reliably. And then suddenly there's a dependence and an imbalance of power. And so I was just drawing these weird blobs and how if that exchange is interrupted and becomes arbitrary and you get everything you want, but you never know if you actually get it, how that, and I was just developing that as I was drawing, thinking of both personal relationships and things I observed in others, and then I spoke to a person who's actually a scientist, a psychologist, and he said, oh yeah, it's called intermittent affirmation. We have so there is a whole theory around that, around how dependent or codependent relationships are controlled by this idea of intermittent affirmation, that people do get everything they need, and then suddenly it's gone. And so they work harder to get it, and then it comes back, just and then it's gone again. And so there's a whole theory around how that structures a certain type of relationship, and I thought it was and I had never heard about that. And I thought it was very interesting that through drawing blobs and trying to connect them in ways that felt right, I came up with the same theory. And so that's, I'm showing that because we've been talking a lot with the artists here about drawings and how they might function. But this is the answer to why art isn't doing what it should be doing. Do you still have some energy, or should we just call it quits? 5 minutes. Okay. This is the graph that everybody basically is worried about right now. It's not the coronavirus, but it's the increase in CO2 concentration since the 50s till roughly today. And it's clearly on a path that will be continued. And everybody knows that that's kind of the figure of climate change. This is a graph that shows the scientific papers that went into the UN reports on climate change. So the first report, I think, came out around here, 1990 and 193. They had around just under 2,000 reports going into that. Scientific papers being quoted in that report. The current one, which they partially published here, but which is supposed to come out in 25, they're expecting to review and integrate into the report between 270 and 330,000 scientific papers. I mean, of course, this has a lot to do with how academia has changed and how publishing is incredibly important. But whatever you say, this is an enormous, like an awesome human effort invested in understanding the predicament we're in. I mean, and also just, just imagine the size of the industry to produce 330,000 scientific papers. This is completely without any proper science, but like artists think, the two curves on top of each other. And you realize it hasn't changed a thing. In 1976, people had a proper model of human-caused climate change. Scientifically, it hasn't changed since then. And whether you use 1,600 or 330,000 papers, it hasn't changed this curve that we're actually at all. And that's a little bit an analogy, I think, to how a lot of engaged in political art works. It's perfectly fine talking about things, pointing out problems, and leaving it there. And it feels no obligation to actually be like, is this worthwhile? Okay, I'm quite engaged in climate protests in Sweden, and there's a group called Artists for Future, and I go there, and I die of shame every Friday because people come there, and they're not just go there as citizens who want to say, I'm concerned, which I think is good, because we're standing outside the residence of the Prime Minister, and when he comes out, he has to say hi and make small talk, and when he goes back, they say, hey, have a good day. So that part I completely like, because it's within what citizens do in a democracy. They show, I think there's a problem. But then there's the artists, and they come up with fancy, colorful performances. And I just look and it's like, who are you? This is the title of this talk. Who the fuck are you kidding? I mean, somebody who doesn't agree with you will not agree with you more because you dress up like a dying polar bear. And a lot of people who may kind of agree with you will find it really embarrassing if a grown person dresses up like a dying polar bear, because we know that polar bears are dying. We didn't need you to tell us. So why did this kind of investment in a way, artistic vanity at a moment when actually political thinking would be advisable, or some kind of pragmatic idea, well, what can we actually do? Or maybe not. I mean, maybe we can't do so much. And then I think, I mean, this is what a lot of the scientists I work with, I've worked with these climate scientists in the Polar Research Station in Sweden, and they basically say, no, it's coming. You know, system collapse is coming. So you don't bother buying a Tesla. You know, don't bother not driving your car to the mall. What you should think about is what happens, what kind of society do you have when things fall apart? Do you have a society based on solidarity or on competition? Do you have a society where compassion is possible, or where we'll have zombie warfare? And Sweden right now, they used to be very well prepared because of all their fear of the Russian. They used to be very good, have good disaster preparedness, but I spoke to someone there who works with these things, and he says, right now, we're 2 meals from anarchy. So the moment something, the food, the supply chains and the cooling chains are so highly efficient and rationalized and tight that it's 2 meals, and then people will go out on the street and start looking for food. Now that is something one can actually think about. Sucking carbon dioxide out of the air is kind of a fancy dream. Anyhow, but so this is the predicament where I see this is kind of where we are culturally. We're in a really, really tight spot, and keep making. What did they do last Friday? They went to the finance ministry and washed the windows to clean off all the fossil fuel investments that the finance ministry has. It's like, come on, you know. I mean, maybe, and it really looked silly. You know, if anything, and I mean, my daughters are also somewhat interested when they see this shit. They say, "I'm not part of that movement. This is just so uncool. I just don't want to be caught with these people." Yes.
I probably have an answer why they are doing this, because it's about the news cycle and the news coverage. And if you make a show, you get more coverage. And this scenario, it looks like
yeah. And that, I think, is really, and this is where I agree with our visitor, this is really cynical, because it is a serious question, and it would warrant us to talk really around about how does society function, how does economy function, and are we doomed to drive this thing into the wall, or can we kind of find ways to and all these things are really serious questions, and nobody has the answer. And then to stand there and say, and wash the windows as a polar bear, it's silliness. I mean, I just feel insulted as an intellectual. And then I also see, because if you look at grant proposals or applications to art schools, you realize I'm very engaged in the whole climate question, and I would never make climate art. I mean, I've stopped writing that into proposals. Now I say it's palliative art. It's about art for a dying culture. You know, what would make life interesting and worthwhile, and maybe allow us to transition into something else. But I don't. I mean, and I think this is a real. This is a weakness of the art world, that it runs into that, and as if it was a silly entertainment or a news cycle or something like that. Instead of saying, like, I mean, artists, we have time. You know, we don't have to have an answer tomorrow. It took a long time to come up with perspective, you know, a long time to come up with, female heroes in novels. So it's not like we have to run out there and make an amazing, colorful performance where we all look like a Handmaid's Tale or something, you know, the Extinction Rebellion with their sad costumes. Where I just cringe. Anyhow, and now, the only climate art that I've seen that impressed me as art is not climate art at all. It's a trend that is developing now in the US, where people have these muscle trucks or monster trucks, and they modify them so they spew as much coal as possible. So the whole idea is to make the car so dirty, so that's the aesthetic pleasure, that it makes. So there's a whole culture around this where they meet and the engines are totally oversized and they make them burn the diesel in such a bad way that maximum soot comes out and is visible. And to me, this is, if I think what can art do, if I talk about climate change being on some level connected to a certain way of conducting business, to a certain masculine idea of grabbing things and taking things and owning things and destroying things because you want to rule over them, and a certain also just joy of aggression, which I think capitalism is about, you know, because nobody, what, Bloomberg owns $69 billion. That's not necessary. Just $1 billion, there's a lot, so you can never spend that in your life. You know? So there is really, at the core of capitalism, I mean, as the driving force, is something really that has nothing to do with luxury or pleasure or being attractive, or it has to do with just wanting more. I mean, at the point where it isn't even, you don't even know what that, I mean, the numbers don't make sense anymore, you know. Once you, so if I think of art that kind of thematizes that, this is a pretty good image. Much better than a polar bear cleaning the windows at the finance ministry, because this is also amoral. It's just, it's looking at it as a phenomenon. It's just like, look, there's something really cool about fucking with nature. There's something that we, on some level, we love this. And that's exactly where a big part of the problem is, that of course we're libidinally invested in progress and growth and more and winning. It's not just we have to, because otherwise we don't have health care. It's like, no, we want to. You know? And it's also very interesting to me that the one image of climate sensitivity that everybody all the way to the far right can agree on is the Tesla. It's like, why do you build a muscle car that's electric, and a car that of course uses, the energy comes from somewhere. It's true it doesn't stink up your city, but somewhere the energy comes from, and in most parts of the world it comes from gas or coal. So you haven't actually done that much to the carbon footprint. You've just given people an excuse to still want the coolest car on the block. You know? And to me, this was not meant as art, kind of is an aesthetic reaction to that I can at least accept, where I say, yeah, this is awful, but kind of cool. Whereas the window washing polar bears are not so cool. I think this is enough. You've been very patient. Are there any questions or comments? No? No?
Probably feel more worse about palliative art.
About what?
Palliative.
Oh yeah, no, that's a very, it's just, okay. I had a bunch of run-ins with mortality, both personally and near me, and I've been, you know, talking a lot to these scientists who are really kind of freaking out. Because I mean, up in the north in Sweden, you see it, I mean, week by week, certain species disappear and others move in, and they're measuring, for example, which also happens, of course, in Siberia much more dramatically. Well, no, actually on the same scale, actually. But we know about it from Siberia because of these huge sinkholes. But up there in the Scandinavian Arctic, the permafrost is melting very fast, and they're just measuring what comes out. And they basically, the amount of greenhouse gases that's in the top couple of feet of permafrost is, I think, 2 trillion times what we put into the atmosphere already. So, and it's not part of any calculation. It's not even part of the climate report, the IPCC reports. So they just realize this is, I mean, what we're talking about, the kinds of changes we're talking about are so behind what they know is actually going on. So I've been thinking about what happens when this all ends. And I mean, the most conservative estimates now are by the UNHCR are 50 million climate refugees by mid-century. The more realistic estimates are 1.5 billion climate refugees by mid-century. That's soon, that's in 30 years. I mean, my children will be around. If I'm lucky, I'm still around. So my children will be in a crucial part of their life. And 1 million Syrians almost brought the EU to its knees, may still. Just imagine 10 times that many, 100 or 150 times that many knocking on the door. I mean, I think we really are at a moment where this cultural model that we're kind of pushing and accelerating, I mean, were it not for coronavirus, that curve would have been going up, 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 up. I mean, it's been going up every year, except for 2015-16, where it flattened a little bit. But then after that, it was just like all shame was gone. So what happens when things fundamentally change? Either personal lives end, societies fall apart, art worlds fall apart. And then I was invited as a cartoonist, strangely, I was invited to develop a humor concept for the German Society of Palliative Medicine. Because supposedly there's a lot of research in this field where they realize humor is largely underestimated in medicine in general. And they're not talking the hospital clown, but more like a humorous outlook on mortality, or in the fact that bodies fail and are not perfect and are in tendency always embarrassing and faulty and so on. And then especially with people who are going to die, they realize that humor is a much, much more powerful way to deal with it, or as powerful as medicine or spirituality and so on. And so they hired me and my partner with whom I do cartoons and comics to develop a humor concept for this huge convention on palliative medicine. And we started working with that and thinking of things we can do there. And then suddenly I thought, yeah, but this is actually a really, really nice metaphor for what I think art should do. How it's going to look like, I have no idea. I know I have a group of people who want to work on it. Daphna Maimon from Berlin, the Israeli, Finnish-Israeli artist. Kasia Fudakowski, who's a Polish artist, who's working a lot with humor and embarrassment and the body failing and really grotesque things. And then Pia Kristoffersen is a Swedish curator who became an undertaker. I mean, she was so sick and tired of the art world that she started a funeral business, and she said she loves it because the people are so much more interesting. So she's going to be part of it, and then a philosopher who's also an art critic. And so we'll bring together this group and just start thinking about that. Like, what would that be like? And I think it might come back to things like he would like. Maybe it is suddenly about offering experiences that make life worthwhile, or that point out that Tesla is maybe as important as a really interesting aesthetic experience or conversation or whatever. Because ultimately that's what you have to hope, that we can find some kind of culture that coalesces around other things than having shit, that coalesces around maybe experiencing things or doing certain things that mean something. You know? And I'm not against consumption and nice objects and so on. But no. So right now it's just a proposition. It hasn't been filled in. But I am next week. I'm going to Berlin to a workshop on how to build your own coffin. So I'm going to build a. Yeah, exactly. You have to use very special paint and so on. Okay.